Hello, thank you for joining this second video panel discussion on the topic of transmission. Transmission is a key factor in the Trillium Awakening Dharma, but what is transmission? Today, I'm delighted to be joined by three colleagues in the Trillium Awakening Teacher Circle who will share their perspectives on transmission. What is it? What role did it play in their own awakening process? And what role does it play in their teaching practice? As I introduce each of today's speakers, we'll take a moment for you to gaze with them before I move on to the other panelists. I'm honored to welcome to our panel today, teacher and member of the Trillium Awakening Elders Circle, Van Gwen. Van has the distinction of being one of the longest practicing teachers in our work. Van is the son of Vietnamese immigrants and spent 39 years working as a holistic dentist in San Francisco. He retired from dentistry earlier this year and currently lives near Sedona, Arizona with his partner, Lynn. Van has been a longtime teacher for over 22 years, starting in 1996 as one of the earliest of the first wave of teachers trained by Samuel Bonder, founder of Waking Down in Mutuality, the ancestor organization out of which Trillium Awakening emerged. As an honored elder teacher, he is a member of the Elders Council of the Trillium Awakening Teacher Circle. As a teacher, Van both honors the spiritual traditions and is moved to creatively innovate and synthesize new evolutionary expressions of what came before. In the early days of Waking Down, he was the unofficial Dharma guardian, along with being known as one of the ongoing progressive supporters of the organic, spontaneous revelation of being. Spiritual transmission has always played a vital and important role in Van's realization process. When Van first went to sit with Samuel in June of 1995 in a ripe state of receptivity, Samuel's potent transmission helped catalyze the initiation of the embodied feeling witness consciousness. Through continued study and transmission, the second birth, or what we now call whole being realization in Trillium Awakening, rapidly unfolded about 7 weeks later. In the summer of 2000, Van had a further deepening of his realization through the nectarous spiritual transmission of the heart-awakened teacher, David Sparrow, who was a master in the Divine Mother lineage. Van was immersed in the transmission of the Mother consciousness, whereby he experienced an ecstatic, radiant love bliss intoxication. The additional aspects of the energetic Shakti current and the devotional love bliss effulgence of divine being were combined with the already established seamless awakening ground of embodied consciousness. Over years of continued exposure to David's transmission, Van noticed a catalytic acceleration of the deepening of his whole being realization into a more advanced stages, where the inherent divine unity between the absolute and the relative, the transcendental and the material, the divine and human, further intensified. The divinization of the body-mind and the material world unfolded into greater fullness within the all-inclusive unity. In this deepening process full of transmission and grace, Van rediscovered that in addition to having a keen discriminative capacity of insight and understanding, he was also an ecstatic devotional mystic who was oriented toward the feminine face of supreme divine being. He is a lover of love, bliss, inebriation, and Mother Shakti, who feels that radiant supreme love is the heart of existence, with transcendental consciousness being the fundamental ground, the body of existence. As a teacher, Van wishes to bring more of these expanded elements into Trillium Awakening to enrich our lives both before and after awakening. Van, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you, Subhaga. So we'll start out with some gazing. All right, so I have about 5 minutes for talking about what is transmission. First, I'd like to say I'm a little nervous, and this is, for those who don't know, this is a little strange because we're staring at a camera and talking into a camera. So this is something new for me. So I wanted to skip to the punchline about what is transmission. Actually, it is hard to describe transmission. It's like trying to describe love. It really can't be put into words. But the punchline is that transmission works. Transmission is the spiritual juice for the whole being realization process. So you actually do not have to understand how it works. It works. And it takes two. So there's the transmitter, in this case, if I'm at a sitting, it's I'm the teacher realizer who's transmitting to the student, the receiver. And it takes two because the receiver needs to be in a receptive ripeness. We have a fancy name in Trillium Awakening called the rot. I like the term spiritual ripeness. So there's a receptivity and a deep interest, a heart yearning for transmission, for awakening, for realization, and that evokes or draws forth, intensifies the spiritual transmission from the teacher. If a person is not hungry, it don't happen too much, or you may not feel it. And I think it's also easier to think of transmission as more as a resonant field, an amplified resonant field, rather than as an energy beam from one person to another. It's even like an atmosphere that happens in the room, like when you do a sitting. And so begin with that. Then I wrote something fancy, so I'm going to just read this one quote from my iPhone here. Transmission is being to being communion in the one being, capital B, the one divine self, the wholeness of total being that we already are. So that's the secret of why transmission works, why spiritual realization works. In a way, it's not a realization. We're not going to some state. We're not going elsewhere. We already are that which we're wanting to realize. There is this inherent wholeness of total being. There is only whole being, or the divine self. We already are that. Now, simultaneously, the secret, the paradox at the heart of existence is that divine being or divine self is simultaneously unmanifested and manifested. It's simultaneously absolute and relative. So we feel separate as this little separate self. And the thing is, we're both this individuated, local, separate self, and we're also the divine unity, and the divine self, the transcendental. And they're actually married together, and that's what's discovered in whole being realization. We already are that. And in transmission, I'm resting and abiding in that, what we already are, both of us, and amplifying, intensifying, magnifying. So then the student's process gets activated and initiated, and it's in like a catalyst that accelerates the awakening process. So that would be one way of trying to describe that which is undescribable in words. So thank you.
Thank you, Van. Let's see, I'm going to switch our camera view again. All right. Joining us from Twisp, Washington this morning is Sugandhi Catherine Barnes. Sugandhi became an interning teacher in 2017. She is an artist and painter, which helps her discover hidden parts of herself that arise in the creative process. The Trillium Path has transformed and continues to transform her life. It has given her a context and language within which she is becoming all her authentic self, deeply embodied, while continually resting in being consciousness. From her teacher page, Sugandhi shares about the evolution of her awakening. As a child, she experienced spontaneous shifts from everyday reality into the realms of infinite consciousness. These experiences raised questions that resulted in a lifetime of seeking for the truth about God and who or what I am. When I discovered Waking Down in Mutuality, I had already done years of work on myself through therapy and other modalities. At the time, I was practicing yoga and meditation and following an Eastern-based spiritual path. After attending my first sitting, I was particularly skeptical and resistant to learning yet another system for awakening. That evening, I felt the teacher's transmission profoundly, but I couldn't see the benefit of sharing. How ironic that mutuality would prove to be a key to my awakening. Over time, I came to realize how vitally important it is for me to be seen, heard, and held without judgment while speaking my truth. I went to as many sittings, workshops, and retreats as I could and soaked up a lot of transmission on the way to my second birth on December 11th in 2011. For Sugandhi, awakening is a process that we all experience uniquely, moving at our own pace and coming to it from different angles. Her own awakening was initially transcendent and impersonal, a space of luscious emptiness and experienced onlyness, herself as everything. This was followed some months later by a second awakening when she fell dramatically into her heart. Since then, she is relaxing more and more into her body as her awakening continues to deepen, as various patterns and pieces arise to be seen and felt and integrated into the whole. She says, "I have finally come home to myself after a lifetime of being away. I feel my purpose is to be fully present here and experience everything, all the juiciness and lusciousness, as well as, and maybe especially, the heartache, to courageously and authentically live from the core paradox, being grounded in the well-being of infinite consciousness, while at the same time being rooted in humanity, allowing all of myself with love and compassion for the difficulty of being here in this limited, poignant, vitally alive, embodied life." Sugandhi lives about 5 miles from a town of 1,000 people in a valley in central Washington, surrounded by mountains, inspired by the vast, ever-changing sky, and deeply nourished by the presence of silence. Sugandhi, welcome. So
Thank you, Subhaga,
take a
my
few
beloved.
minutes. Thank you, my dear one. So take a few minutes and give us your elevator speech to answer the question, what is transmission?
What is transmission? Oh, it's kind of funny because I'm also nervous, and I'm so moved by my own writing. Like when somebody else says it, combined with the transmission that I'm feeling, I'm falling just deeply into this beautiful, vulnerable place. Transmission, it is one of those things that is almost impossible to describe. I just want to mention that we skipped the gazing part for me, right? But anyway, forget it.
We'll just gaze at the end of your elevator speech.
Okay. Transmission. I think what we're talking about here when we talk about transmission is awakened transmission, which, Van pointed out as well. But it's what I perceive is the life force, the being force, the divine, sacred force of God really flows through the awakening being, and the recipient, can either experience that or not, as you say, depending on how many sort of barriers there are to that. I also feel that transmission is almost something that it's not that it doesn't happen, not in mutuality, but in mutuality with another person. It's almost for the other. You know, it's not necessarily for me. It's for the person that I'm gazing with. It's for the whole room. I believe that transmission is this energetic force that actually holds the sacred container that we talk about in our sittings. To me, it feels like love. It feels like love, relaxation, bliss, sweetness. It can be intoxicating. You know, I find that the more I'm in this work, and there are times when I'm in a transmission field that just feels so strong to me that I just become like the drunken idiot or something, stumbling around, beaming, you know. So it is enlivening. It makes us feel more alive, more beaming, full of light. And it's transformative, as you mentioned. It is transformative, and I do believe it's a large factor. We don't know how big of a factor it is in our work, but I'll talk more about that later.
Great. So why don't you share a minute of gazing with us? Our third panelist joining us today is interning teacher Kelly Yee. Kelly Yee entered the work in 1999 and had his second birth shortly thereafter. Based on his interning teacher page bio, I've gleaned some of what led him to both our work and his rapid confirmation as a whole being realizer. He had a long spiritual practice encompassing Christianity and Eastern meditation and yoga teachings. Kelly writes, "Through the practice of Surat Shabd Yoga, I had many experiences and synchronicities that were not typical, such as various encounters with the unseen world. Through these experiences, I realized that reality was much bigger than the materialist worldview that was predominant when I went to college. Eventually, while practicing this tradition, I had a sudden realization of what is termed consciousness in Trillium Awakening. I realized that I was not my body and not my mind, but an ever-present, timeless awareness beyond them. I termed this awareness God at the time and knew deep in my bones that everyone and everything is that." Kelly became an interning teacher in 2015. He felt drawn to being a teacher after being a mentor for approximately 12 years or so, and enjoys facilitating people's psycho-spiritual process, which led him down this path. He is also a psychologist and a professor of clinical and transpersonal psychology. In terms of his work as a Trillium teacher, in essence, his view is that there is not a separate thing anywhere in the universe and cosmos. We all inter-are. The process of awakening is being able to embrace this spiritual truth more and more fully, not just with the mind, but also with your heart, body, and whole being. And through this whole being realization, unfold your own unique expression of totality as you feel called. This includes all the wounded parts of yourself, as well as your highest and most mysterious divinity, from soul to spirit and even beyond. Kelly lives and practices in Palo Alto. So Kelly, why don't you share some gazing with us first?
All right.
For about a
That's
minute.
good.
Thank you.
All right. Is the camera on me right now? Okay, great. It's kind of weird to gaze with a camera. That's the first time I've done that.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So tell us your elevator speech. What is transmission?
Sure, yeah. So for myself, I see transmission, personally, I don't see it as a special thing. I see transmission as a universal thing that everyone's doing all the time. I feel like as humans, even other sentient beings are transmitting certain states and traits of consciousness. What I think is unique in our work is that teachers in this work are transmitting certain qualities of awakening and the divine. And when that happens, there can be a sort of resonance that happens with practitioners, other teachers, other collections of individuals. And that actually creates a sort of almost like a transmission field during sittings, during retreats, or what have you. And within that field, I feel like, kind of like what Van and both Van and Sugandhi were saying, it's almost like something else that's very much like transpersonal gets constellated in that field. And it feels almost like we're all participating in something much bigger than ourselves, which I think is the phenomenological experience of some of this attuning to these states and traits. Within our work, I think there's certain qualities that each teacher embodies more. I'd say for Van, for example, he's really developed and progressed in this transmission of the divine love quality of the divine being. And also through his work with David and other teachers, and probably his own unique spiritual development and soul has really magnified that quality. So he naturally has that sort of transmission, and then during the gazing meditations and other times, I feel like it gets magnified. Yeah, so in general, that's my general sense, and I think each person, each teacher, each person, each even sentient being in the universe has their own unique transmission, and each person, through their own personal development, really develop a certain type of transmission that the more that they develop, they start radiating certain particular qualities of the divine. So I see that as our work helping individuals go through their development to start radiating more of those divine qualities. I think that's about it for now for the elevators.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. All right, so we will now enter into our formal part of the conversation where I'll ask each teacher 2 questions. We'll go through first one round and then a second round. So Van, we're going to start with you. What role did transmission play in your awakening process?
First, I want to share that it was very exciting and enjoyable to hear Sugandhi and Kelly share their perspective on transmission. And I'm going to give a commercial now. This is one of the assets of Trillium Awakening, multiple teachers, multiple awakened teachers, different flavors, qualities, different soul nature. And so then here's an example of it. It's just wonderful. It's just thrilling to me. Okay, so how long do we have for this part approximately?
I'd say about 15 minutes.
Okay. All right. Transmission has been a key component, primary ingredient of my spiritual process excuse me, I can get a little water. From before the whole name, you know, the second birth, then to have the initial realization, and then further deepening, further evolution, or further maturing of the whole being realization continues to play a big role. So I'll give some more specifics. I'm going to give just a little overview. I have found myself, even after the initial second birth, I recognized that my sense was there's further evolution that could happen. And then we talked some about that in Trillium Awakening, but one of my goals as a teacher and a member of the Elders Council is to expand the current Dharma, and also to expand the umbrella to encompass the diversity of perspectives that we have in the whole range of Trillium teachers. So when I first talk about the initial second birth, I would call that initial whole being awakening. Then, the thing that I was going to say is that I was interested in continuing to deepen in the awakening after the initial second birth. So I further, let's say, did graduate studies. I did graduate studies. And transmission was the key of the graduate studies, like accelerating, further evolving into, let's say, maturing into more advanced stages of whole being realization. And so I discovered that this does happen, to skip forward, like the initial paradoxical unity of being of the divine and the human, the sandwich of the absolute and the relative, this being finite and infinite, this unity further gets fuller and fuller. You can say, well, unity is unity, but it gets fuller and fuller. And the personal self gets further divinized and more fused or dissolved into this unified field, the supreme unified field of whole divine being. And so transmission has played a role in accelerating and catalyzing this further fullness of unity. And then also these qualities that I was very thrilled that Gandhi was talking about, the drunkenness and the bliss and the love. That actually, and thank you, Kelly, you recognize I'm a love bug. Like, love is, I feel, the heart of existence, divine love, supreme love, the core of existence. And so this is an inherent part of my being, my soul nature. And I found, let's say, further magnification, intensification of divine love and bliss and the intoxication, and then the aliveness of the Shakti through transmission. Okay, so that's the overview. Now go to the second birth. So I go to see Samuel Bonder, and I felt like I was a spiritual failure and a human failure. And I had a traumatic childhood and abuse, and I did 8 years of one-to-one therapy. And I'm the living proof that you can be neurotic and have wounding and stuff like that and still awaken. But you awaken with it. You don't like get all of a sudden a new, I'm all different. And that's the challenge of being these extremes of the human and the divine. And they're fused together and in the simultaneous sandwich, that you have more stable access to living in and as that paradox of being human and divine. And you get more divine and you get more human, you become more and more also yourself as you relax into that. But you awaken with your neurotic stuff. And so I went to see Samuel like that. I did not even think I could awaken in this lifetime. I thought I was going to get like grace so that I could awaken in a future lifetime. So I went to see Samuel to try to get some grace and help. And so I sat there in his living room, and during the gazing, and in this time he was gazing randomly, and he happened to gaze with me twice. And then there's the closed eye part, and it's hard to describe in words, but I felt like some kind of the scent of some kind of energy. And I knew consciousness, you can't experience consciousness, but I was feeling some heightened presence. Something was happening. And the Reader's Digest version, in that sitting, the embodied feeling witness consciousness came awake. And I was sitting there going, okay, I'm witnessing this. Let's see, this shouldn't be happening to me. Oh, that thought is arising in this awareness field in consciousness. And I was going, wow, this is interesting. This could be happening to me. Oh, this shouldn't be happening. Oh, that is arising. So that was remarkable to me. That's transmission, the power of magic of transmission, the accelerator, the spiritual juice. So I continued to work with Samuel, and there were two other colleagues of his that held sittings separately that I also went to see and get juiced up, tanking up on being, with this being force. So it was, I think, somewhere, what did I say, 11 weeks or whenever it was, August 11th, the second birth happened. So I felt this intensification of consciousness, the fire and burning of consciousness. I also felt this love, this uncaused, centerless love. And so that was magic. This transmission had this accelerator effect, this catalytic effect. Let's see. So what I found out is I was ripe. Okay, so because I thought I can't awaken, but there was this ripeness there. The rot had happened. I went with the rot. Okay, so that was remarkable. Reader's Digest verse. Then there was a certain, I noticed, let's say after 5 years, so this is 2000. It was I call it the beige period, where I was recognizing I was consciousness in the body, and there was this wellness from that, and my neurotic issues would come up, but I could not be exclusively identified with them, and there was a sense of unity of the material and the divine dimensions, so more seamlessness, this paradoxical seamless unity. But I wasn't really happy, and I was kind of lonely and just working in dentistry and So I had heard about David Sparrow, and so I went to see him. And in the sitting, he said, don't just listen to me, because I was trying to figure out his realization. Let's see, figure out. Then he said, don't just listen to me, feel me. So I opened in feeling. And then in a short period of time, I was feeling this like ecstasy, this love, bliss, intoxication, like a love swoon. And like I was drunk. And I couldn't believe this was happening with that intensity and so fast. So that was remarkable. So that, again, is transmission. Let's say it's probably another variety of transmission. I call this the mother transmission, where you have that love, bliss, the Shakti current, and this inebriation, along as the ground of consciousness. This is all part of it. And an embodied unified field of all that. And afterwards, then after this sitting for weeks and it continued, I felt like I was in love. And I was happier, and like the life, like it was a black and white scene of the surroundings becoming color. I was going, such a pity to die. And I was going, wow, this is amazing. What to find this aspect that's available. And so this my personal aesthetic is, I'm oriented to the feminine face of God, or the supreme divine self, and that to me is the supreme love and the living energy current and the bliss and the nectar. So I'm a nectar addict. Yeah. So that's why I've continued to spend time with Dave Sparrow. I just happen to have this soul connection with, so to get irradiated by this, to deepen in this. And so this unity and more waves of love, bliss, enjoyment. It is intoxicating. It is like getting drunk. And this is one of the things I want to expand in Trillium Awakening, because we have focused on the consciousness and the changing phenomena, and put kind of to the side the living current, the Shakti current, the divine energy, and then also the divine love and bliss and that side. So I want to bring this into Trillium Awakening more, because this is the whole spectrum of being. And we want to, it's whole being realization. So this is part of the whole spectrum of being, and there's this wholeness and totality, but is also this, love permeated unity, this unified field. So, so transmission, I continue, I'm an addict. I'm a bliss addict. Okay. So I continue to go spend time with David to magnify and intensify this. And then, but see, then you get irradiated by it. The body mind gets irradiated by it. So also being a teacher, I want to share this with others. And so I feel I'm getting further irradiated enough to share this and transmit this. This is all grace. Like, remember, I didn't even think I could awaken. I wasn't planning to become a teacher. And so this is all grace and very magical that this has unfolded in my life. Now, also I have to say, I'm a little shy about teaching, and I have this, the neurotic personality is this perfectionist side, where I keep going, I don't know if any of you out there suffer from this, but it's like, I'm not good enough. I gotta grow further, not perfect enough. So this is so also that this is part of what I embrace, the human and the divine, and this whole fullness of being. Just one further thing to say is transmission. More recently, there was a further deepening where the through the transmission, it was being with David, and the unity got fuller and fuller and became like a singular, the singularity of the unity and the undividedness of divine being became more obvious. And the personal self, which I was just relaxing, embracing the personal self moment to moment, and then relaxing it second to second, letting it be, then the unity of being, the wholeness of being, the totality of being became more obvious. Like there's only one supreme divine being. Everything is that. And the personal self got more dissolved into that. The unity became more prominent than the personal self. And then I'm going, wow, we're all that. See, this is the secret. We all are the divine, the full divine being. There is no separateness from it that we have to get reconnected to. It's already a total unity, seamless unity. So this further got intensified, a greater fullness, like a primordial oneness. So this is all part of transmission and the magic and grace of transmission. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Van. That was just such a rich and beautiful discussion of transmission. And I really loved and appreciated how you talked about, you know, not feeling as if you could even awaken in this lifetime, and really the unzipping, you know, think we're going to unzip and this new thing is going to pop out. So really quite beautiful. Okay, Sugandhi, tell us about your, the role of transmission in your awakening process.
Wow. Van has a way of making me feel drunk, so but I'm going to focus here on myself. Okay, transmission has been a huge part of my awakening process. I mentioned in Subhaga mentioned to me in my introduction that I had experiences as a child of, I called it dropping into consciousness there, but of course, you know, you don't really experience consciousness. So I you know, realized that, you know, yes, I did, but probably what I experienced was the coming back, you know, I would disappear and come back, and I would feel this just tremendous peace. And very notable experiences, you know, I mean, I remember them very specifically and very strongly. And I'm not going to go throughout my whole life, but, you know, I think the first time I really felt I was immersed in transmission was with Amma. You know, for about 5 years before I stumbled onto Waking Down, I became an Amma devotee, and I would go to her whenever she was in the country and go to all the different places, travel, and I went to her ashram in India one time. And what I experienced with her was so profound. I really felt her energy would just enter my body, you know, and I was aware of it. It was almost like she was moving the furniture around in my inside. You know, it would rearrange and transfigure me inside, and it felt like I was being aligned, more and more aligned to the divine quality of her transmission. And it was addictive, you know, it was kind of not addictive, but blissful, just the love just pouring off of this individual. It's not, you know, it was just pouring, just channeling the love and bliss energy of life, divine, sacred energy, which of course is intensified by being close, you know, having the embrace. But I could feel that transmission before I even walked in the room, you know, in the parking lot. You're like, ah, you know, here I am, you know. So I had that experience, but I knew, intuitively, I knew I needed something more. You know, this was not my path, simply. You know, I needed something more. So we were looking around and found a Waking Down sitting 5 minutes, 10 minutes from where I live, and we went, and it was sitting with Alan Morlock, who later became my teacher, and I remember sitting there, the whole process of sharing and all that, I was just like, ugh, it feels like a therapy group, you know, I wasn't into it. But I felt his transmission. I felt this energetically, I felt deeply, deeply peaceful. I was in a sweet, sweet place. The mind is not liking what's going on, but the body was just open to the energetic of the sitting. And So much so that I remember I had trouble even driving the car home. You know, we drove a little bit to the first stop sign, and I just remember stopping there, and it's like, oh my God, I don't even remember which way to turn, or how to change. Like, what's going on here? You know, it's very intriguing, and is what brought me into the work. I learned about transmission early. You know, I heard that spoken, you know, transmission is a large part of the work, and this sort of description of this energetic quality. I thought, oh yeah, okay. So I did all the things. I read every book. I gazed with pictures, and I gazed with gazing videos on the internet, and I went to as many in-person weekends and sittings as I could over the next, it took me 9 months. I was just like a baby. I had 9 months, and then I had my initial awakening, which we call whatever we call it now, whole being realization. And that was during the third Rose of Your Heart weekend with Saniel. Alan was also there, and many of my beloved friends were there. And during that, I don't know if I'm skipping too much, but that's okay. During that weekend, I really felt suspended, sort of between this incredible opening to the field in a way of, I would say, it's a non-ordinary state, you could call it. I was just kind of suspended between being, you know what I think I was? I think I had the embodied witness consciousness. This is so interesting because when you mentioned that, Van, I really thought, oh, that's probably what happened to me, because during the weekend, I kept, you know, my mind would go like, but you still feel separateness. You know, I was feeling this opening. It was like I was having, all the colors were brighter, all the people were shining with divine light. Early on in my experience at sittings, love had come on board, and I had felt like I loved everybody in the room within half an hour of being in a sitting. And, you know, this quality just was, you know, 10 times more. I was just like, but I at the same time, there's this little voice saying that, yeah, but you still feel separateness. And then something would happen that would show me that that wasn't true. And then the next question I'd have was, yeah, but, you know, I went through this interrogation process of myself the whole weekend. And then by the time I went home, I just had an opening of emptiness in my body that was actually visible to me. You know, I could look inside, and it would be almost like, well, totally like an empty space. Like I felt like the wind could blow through me. I was completely open, and that lasted for a couple months. And then again, I was in an intense transmission field at a weekend with Jean Marchand. It was beautiful, kind of. He's a very heart-centered person. In fact, the question of the weekend is, what is your heart's desire? And, you know, we really delved into this. And in the middle of that weekend, I just dropped completely into that open space, just filled in, and this amazing sort of effervescent, effulgent feeling happened in my chest. And I was completely stunned with the beauty and the poignance of everything, and just the divine nature of everything. I could really feel that. I fell deeply into, yeah, what else was I going to talk about? Further evolution. Well, I had been in human design, and I think part of this was I've already had spent 7 years switching my orientation from my mind to my body. So I kind of skipped that part, but that's like, I think really important in my experience. I was already sort of energetically attuned to my body, but then I kind of, that became more my leader, my decision maker. And this is where I feel guided. And I do feel guided. You know, I feel that I'm you know, more and more, as I awaken more and more, I'm, you know, I didn't want to become a teacher either. And I just really, it happened because I felt my body just kept going that way. You know, it's just, you know, and the mind is complaining and, you know, I don't like to do this kind of thing. I really don't like to talk this much. You know, it's like, I just want to be in my studio and paint my pictures and listen to nothing, the silence and the weight and the beauty of the mountains. I don't want to do all this hard stuff. But I'm compelled, and this is my way. I'll just say maybe one more thing. I recently went to an evolutionary collective introductory weekend, because I too feel like what happens for me is every time I was taught at the TR this summer, and I felt there something came on board, which was like felt like the power of the transmission I felt coming through me felt like it was like tripled or something. You know, I just felt this really big change, and I could just, it was interesting, and I just leaned into it. It would be a little bit more, and leaned into it, and I'd feel it a little bit more, and it felt like I was sort of shining forward. So I was looking for more places where I could just go and be in that field. So I thought, I'll try this. It's about, and it's interesting because I feel that mutuality has been a big key for me. Like I needed to be able to put out in words what was going on with me. And if I did, if it would lock it in and I would understand it better, and I would be, you know, sort of fleshing out my awakening. And this is what they're all about. So it's almost like, I don't know, it was really, really profound to drop into that kind of transmission field where it's all about just unity with the other. There's no telling your story. It's a little different than what we do, but it's just almost like the next step in mutuality where you're simply being with the other person in deeper and deeper ways. It was quite beautiful. So yes, we are here as teachers to help people. Do we help people? We transmit this energy. Transmission is doing the work. This is one message I do want to get across. I feel like I went from zipped through in 9 months to my awakening, and I think that happened because I really focused on placing myself in transmission, in awakened transmission, through reading, through gazing, through in-person contact. I mean, online contact is good if that's all you have, but still buy the plane ticket, you know, go to the in-person things as well, because that's really where it happens, and it is magical, beautiful. Yeah, part of our work. I think that's pretty good.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Makes me think, maybe we should have a nice panel discussion on mutuality as well, because, you know, talking about how when we come into mutuality, you know, with another, how the transmission is really amplified. And what you said about, you know, when we have to speak, you know, what's going on with us, how it kind of locks it down, locks it in for us so we can understand it and know it in a different way, really bringing the mind and the body together. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sugandhi. Okay, Kelly, tell us about your the role of transmission in your awakening process.
Sure, sounds good. So for myself, it was pretty central, the transmission. My very first Waking Down weekend was when I had I'd say my initial shift from this whole being realization state, I'd say. And how that happened was mainly through the transmission. I was gazing with a couple of teachers that are no longer with Trillium or Waking Down. One guy, I think his name was John. I was gazing with him, and then this place, consciousness for me was more spatial, and it felt like this timeless, changeless space behind my mind. So I came into the work, I pretty much was living that way for a couple of years, and then during the gazing, it just fell forward into my body and then into the world. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's this, like, the word I used was, there's this translucency that it's like pervading the world and manifestation in some way. Right before that, though, actually, I was gazing with this woman who also was in the work before. Her name is Rini, and she had a very, like, potent and strong transmission, actually. And right before I gazed with John, with Rini, I felt also that kind of shift from being behind myself, shift into the body. But actually, it felt like something in my belly broke open. And I felt like a little teary-eyed. And I think through her transmission, there was, and she had a very strong, like, heart energy and kind of divine love energy. And what broke open, it felt like some sort of almost like wounding I was holding in my body broke open with her. And then that's when that happened with John. So I think that combination actually catalyzed my whole being realization. And then from that point, similar to what Gandhi and Van were talking about, I got not addicted, but I was going to a lot of sittings. I was going to sittings maybe 3 to 4 times a week. This is when in Marin there is quite a number of sittings with Samuel, with his ex-partner, with Linda. You know, all sorts of people were giving sittings. I used to sit with Van and Jen a lot as well. And through that process, I would see whenever I would go to sittings that it really would magnify this. It's like a silent, love, bliss, open consciousness state. Whenever I would go to the sittings, it would just really magnify that. But I did notice a sort of struggle for myself during that time. So I was doing that probably my first year or so involved with the work. But I noticed when I would leave the sittings and then there would be some carryover into my life, I noticed some of the same sort of self-contractions come back. And that was this kind of like oscillating type of phenomena we talk about in the work.
Well, we had a momentary lapse in internet connection here, but now we're back. And so thank you, Kelly and Van and Sugandhi, each for giving those wonderful reports on the role of transmission in your own awakening process. I found it just absolutely transporting. And many of you said things that pointed us in the direction of how you use transmission in your teaching work. So we'll do this as a kind of more of a panel discussion than individual speakers. So Van, why don't you start us off? Everyone can just unmute themselves now.
Okay. All right, thank you. Also to say, if there's more Kelly wants to say, you know, I want to hear more. But, he was in the middle of something and it went, okay. All right.
No, I'm good. You could go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. Well, one thing I'd like to say is I like what you said, Kelly, about everyone has a transmission, and even animals. And there's let's say when there's a clarification in what we call whole being realization, which is more a remembering or unforgetting of the paradoxical unity of the absolute and the relative, of human and divine, the transcendental and the local, then so it's more a remembering. And so we all have a transmission, and let's say when there's a further clarification where we can abide and have more steady access to feeling, abiding as that simultaneous, paradoxical, seamless unity that is the wholeness of divine being, then that has a certain other quality or amplified or intensity of transmission that, and since we're two human animals, let's say in terms of transmission with a teacher and a student, the receiver is going, hey, that's another human being in this awakened, living this paradoxical unity of being, and I am that also. And this, it's a kind of love communion. I think I love, like what's so Gandhi said, that transmission is love. It's awakened conscious love. It's a love connection, and love is this holistic relationship that happens. And so then the person gets resonated, osmosis, they get attuned to this unified being, this wholeness of being. And so we're just being that together, being to being, that we're already that wholeness of undivided being, the total being. So there's, so now in my early teaching work, thought longer gazing was better. So there are times I gaze 5 minutes, in individual sessions, and 20 minutes, I did this one, 20-minute gazing. I also enjoyed mutual gazing, what became mutual gazing. Now, when I first began teaching back in 1996, it was looser, no rules. So I would have other people gaze in a second birth, and what we call mutual gazing, other people gazing with, people gazing with one another. And then there became a lot of rules. And I go, oh my God, there's too many rules. They're restricting the gazing. Also, just a little tangent. We talk about this open-eyed gazing, that form of transmission. Transmission also happens when your eyes are closed. You can have closed-eye meditation and transmission. Then there's the whole group, everyone attending the sitting. It's a whole group transmission field. It's a resonant, amplified resonant field. Then there's also a further quality, transmission beyond the physical space of a sitting, where there can be transmission, this kind of magical transmission beyond time and space, where you're not in the same physical room or the same time. So there can be an ongoing connection with an awakened teacher, and you have availability to, let's say, their more cosmic or transcendental body. I think the more fully realized a teacher is in, advanced stages of whole being realization, then there's maybe a greater potency of this transmission, the 24/7 cosmic body, transcendental body connection that can happen. But these are other aspects of transmission beyond just the one-to-one open-eye gazing that we tend to associate with transmission in Trillium Awakening. So back to when there were all these rules, I wanted to loosen it up again. So it was a number of years back where I drafted a proposal to open up gazing within a framework. And so there was teacher-student gazing, and then peer mutual gazing and non-peer mutual gazing. This is so the mentors could do gazing. So that got adopted. So gazing got more liberalized again. And so now we have mutual gazing regularly at many of the sittings. So I do that at my sitting, and like when I gaze with the participants, then there'll be mutual gazing among the participants. And I think that further enriches the sitting and makes it more potent. And the other thing that in my early days of teaching, there was a bias, like kind of, you know, if you have the second birth, there's a certain betterness about being in the second birth as not being in the second birth. You know, it's a subtle kind of spiritual politics. And in further deepening, then I'm going, everyone is divine being. There's no one that's not that. It just, they may not remember the fullness, the wholeness of being simultaneously human and divine and how they're married together. But it's still true. There's only the divine being. There's only the divine self. It is this one utterly total and whole unified field. So the other thing that I came up with, being devotionally oriented, I came up with another name. I call it beholding the beloved. So in gazing, it's like I, as an embodiment of the Supreme Beloved, I'm gazing with another embodiment of the Supreme Beloved. There's the Supreme Beloved is gazing, communing with another manifestation of the Supreme Beloved. So it's being a deep being communion of beholding the beloved. So recognizing the inherent divinity of me and the other person, which is myself. There's only the one self. And so I call that beholding beloved. And so this, you could say, brings a more devotional flavor, but it's also remembrance, remembering we're all divine, and ain't no better that you got the whole being realization, formally or not. You're already this fullness of, you're a full manifestation of the sacred beloved or divine being. And so that's also where love is more important. So you already love the person in fullness, and this is a love communion. So that, you know, it is an important part of the sitting. Now, the other thing is to say, even when we're talking and answering questions, then there's transmission and a resonant field happening then also. It's not just divided, okay, now we'll do transmission. Okay, now we're gonna do talking. It's all happening. Then even then after the sitting, then you could say the transmission can continue if there's still a sensitivity and an attunement to that. So I like to have longer, I do a little longer gazing. When I haven't held sittings in a while, but I want to start doing some more teaching work. Now, you know, now that I'm retired. But so if there's, I would have smaller sittings, could be 4 to 6 people. So I'd want to gaze longer. So I might gaze definitely 1 minute, but maybe 3 to 5 minutes with each person. And then everyone else in the sitting will then pair off and be gazing, you know, doing the mutual gazing while I'm gazing around the room with individual participants. So I like the longer gazing. And then I also would do longer closed eye portions. So we could just steep in it and let the personal self dissolve and just melt into the unified field and let the love intensify and the bliss intensify and the Shakti intensify. And so you can get more drunk in that. And the other thing I'd like to say, in waking down, you know, there was a thing where you want to stay embodied. You want to be present in and as embodied, the down work. And, you know, I did about 8 years of one-to-one therapy. And I also still deal with, I have, some people already know this, I have a version of obsessive compulsive disorder. It's like a exaggerated paranoia and fear of dangerous chemicals. And I have some version of a hoarding disorder. I still have all that. So what was the point of this? So in so I forget what I was going to say about that, but this is part of the whole sandwich that each of us is, where this extreme is like this tantric embrace of being divine and very human. And so that's what I was going to say. Love. So there's about being down. Okay, so I was down in this shit, and had to deal with it. But then we can get overly obsessed with our psychology. I got to fix it. And I did therapy. It's helped. I continue to do therapeutic things that help. That we also want to remember our sacred side, our divinity, that in being, there's this inherent perfection, and not get obsessed about perfecting the personality. And so then we used to like focus, well, stay down, and you don't want to be too like ascended or out of body. I think there is a place for that once there's a sufficient integration with the wake down, shake down, or sacred reconfiguration of relaxing attention from the body mind, and have periods where you can let the body mind dissolve, melt, let attention, feeling open, and abide as the whole divine unified field, and even the bliss intoxication, let yourself just melt into that inherent truth and this inherent wholeness of being. So I think there's definitely, that's very important, and that is something that evolves as we the unified field gets more prominent, and the personal self can get almost engulfed or immersed in that, and then the personal self, there are periods when it gets more diffuse, more melted. And so that is an important part of advancing, I think, as a practice in more advanced stages of whole being realization. So the closed-eyed part in meditation and during sitting or in your own personal meditation, I think also important just to let yourself melt and enjoy that dissolveness, or this communion becomes more merging into that unified feel, the primordial oneness that is at the heart of being. So I think I'll just leave it there for now. I think that's enough.
That's great, man.
We'll have further dialogue.
Great, thank you. Sugandhi, what role does transmission play in your teaching?
I have melted. I have to reconfigure myself for a minute here. I have kind of maintained, I also have a deep connection with the Divine Mother. That's how I think of the divine. Let's see. So in one-on-one sessions, I always invoke the Divine Mother within myself before the session. And I ask, to have her words come out of my mouth, If any words are spoken, may it be hers. And so I have a little prayer, I have a little ritual that I do before a session. And I always do I always gaze with the person if we're online. I don't have in-person capabilities here in the middle of nowhere where I live, so it's mostly online, or unless I'm teaching at a weekend or a retreat. So we'll do either meditation and gazing or just gazing. And while I'm doing that, often the invocation that I do is during that meditation or at the beginning of gazing. I'm sort of internally and mentally doing that connection with the divine. And at the same time, I feel the other person in my body. I tune into my body and I tune into the other person in a bodily way, which is, and what happens is I wait, I gaze until I feel the person just drop in and settle. And I can feel that. I guess you would call me an empath. Some people call that empathic, and able to feel other people energetically. And this is very helpful in teaching, because there are times when I'll start feeling fear, or I'll start feeling feelings that I know are really not mine. So it kind of helps me to know where the other person is. So we start right out with the transmission kind of field, gazing, meditation, and then during the time, the whole session, I'm consciously kind of holding the field of love. Well, the way I do it is I relax. I keep one part of my mind, or one part of my being is relaxed into the silence where I live, with this deep, deep silence here. So I relax one part of my being into that silence, and the love is just there. And so I hold that. And that takes some effort on my part to maintain that kind of focus. It feels great too. But I think, so I'm responding to the person, and we're communicating to each other from a kind of a non-normal place. You know, it's not just a conversation for me. When I'm teaching, I'm deeply listening with my body, holding this field of love and feeling a lot of love for the person that's speaking. And also, I guess it's even a kind of a wider perspective emerges. So I am able to kind of see the bigger picture of whatever's being presented to me. And sometimes I can reflect that back a little bit. And it's really is sort of a channeling. It's not really channeling, but I kind of wait and make sure that what I'm saying is real, what I really want to say. So I'm kind of careful about that. I feel a lot of responsibility kind of in this situation. A lot of times people come to me with deeply felt growing edges that I want to respond to with the deepest truth that I can come forward with, and that is aided. You know, the whole field of the sacred container just arrives, and that magical saying things you don't even know you're going to say, and they happen to be the thing that opens the door further, happens in that kind of magical field. It's like painting. When I paint, I'm not thinking, and I'm just creating. I'm just letting my brush do the work, and I may have an idea that I started out with, but oftentimes it goes off in whatever direction it goes off in. So it's painting, the image led. The image arrives on the canvas, and then I work on it more consciously. So this is student led in that sense. It's like they're leading where we go, and I'm holding them very deeply. So what else do I want to say? I do sort of focus on, I like to, people come from their sharings in different ways. I like to feel the connection between mind and body, and I often do. It's ironic and kind of interesting to me that most of the people that have come to me are people that have, oddly and magically, things that my issues, they almost come to me with my issues. And so I recognize them, and I'm careful to know that whatever looks like my issue might not be. So I let them expound, and I ask questions, and we look at it with curiosity and kind of examine whatever's coming up from a new, open place, for certainly. But there's a lot of resonance, and I feel even that is the larger field of being transmitting into my practice. You know, it's bringing to me what I need to hear, and therefore it's bringing me people that need to hear the words that I have to say, or that are coming through my system. So it can be, you know, just very much a part of the deep mutuality that happens in teaching. I think in teaching, it's really important for the teacher to be willing. There's a lot of, Van has pointed towards this, but what I think of as willingness is be a willingness to be open to something greater happening. There's a willingness to be vulnerable, to be in our deepest core nature with another person, but the teacher has to have the willingness as well. You know, it's not like they're doing it. It is like they're doing it, and I'm letting them lead. It's all about them on the one hand. On the other hand, I have to be willing to feel all the whatever's coming up for me, and hold that too, and in sometimes a very vulnerable way, which makes it a rich field for both of us to kind of lean into the present moment and what's arising. And I feel a lot of deepening in my own awakening through the process of teaching. It's quite a beautiful process. So that's about all that's coming up for me right at this moment.
Wow, that's great. You know, what struck me listening to you speak was, you know, I'm not sure I'll be able to articulate it because I felt it so strongly. It's like when we're teaching, especially in one-on-one sessions, like we're really teaching out of the paradox. You know, there is really no separation. It's all arising in the field of being. The student is arising in the field of being. We're arising in the field of being, and that resonance that comes up, you know, where they're articulating something that is we also need to hear, you know, is just all in that field of transmission at the same time that we're holding them as their own unique arising, a manifestation of consciousness of their own unique human being, and we're our own unique human being. So it's a really beautiful way that you wove together some of the things also that Van was talking about.
Yes, and I would say one step further, we are also only one human being together. Well,
right.
Like what Van was saying, I mean, there's just like we're both coming at it, but there's this beautiful unity that comes out. And I just feel over the months of working with someone, the love field just grows exponentially. And so, you know, I just feel like it's so easy. It's just so easy. It's so easy to love the student that just happens just automatically. It's not even a thought. It's more just part of the flow of it.
Spontaneous arising. I'm thinking of Alan says, you know, it's like there's 7 billion people in the world and 7 billion cells in the body, you know, that we're just one body and we're each little cells fulfilling our function, you know, at that moment. Yeah, that's great. Kelly, what have you got to share with us about the role of transmission in your teaching practice?
Yeah, thank you. I just feel, both Van and Sugani, very rich sharing. So I had all sorts of percolations as you both were sharing. I guess for myself, especially lately in my life, I've been holding a similar sort of focus and intention for both my life and my work, not just within Trillium, but beyond that, that I hold this intention of both manifesting my own kind of deepest soul purpose as well as helping others do that. And then also realizing my deepest spiritual realizations as well as holding that for others. So that's a common intentionality I have in my work with people, in my life in general. So in the context of that, I've noticed that, you know, I think the transmission is essential And when I say that, I mean like relationship is essential. Like some of the stuff, I mean, you could read in a book and then you could think certain things and then maybe you could somewhat glimpse some of it, but really why I think our work is so unique and also it's different in a lot of ways is it's about relationship, right? We form unique relationships with the students we work with, and within that relationship, there's a sort of energetic communion that happens. And that communion can happen not just when we're meeting with the student, but long after, almost like the way, I like the metaphor of all of us being like cells in a body, almost the way like neurons fire and wire together, right? There's some sort of ongoing bond there. And just off of what Van and Sugandhi were talking about, I was thinking about there's these studies, it's called the Maharishi effect, where these meditators were in like Washington, D.C., and they meditated for a certain amount of time. And you saw the crime rate drop significantly during that amount of time. And that to me is like collective transmission, right? It's that when people start resonating and transmitting certain qualities that emanates out into the field. And even the, like, for example, I live in San Francisco. If a bunch of us got together, had a retreat here, and we're really resonating in that field reverberates out beyond just the group. It reverberates out into the whole environment in some way. And people who are, even people who aren't open, but people are somewhat open, maybe they really take it in. Other people who aren't that open, maybe aren't as influenced, but maybe it even affects them some. So that's kind of one piece of how I see transmission and teaching. You know, it's interesting that both Van and Sugandhi also mentioned this Divine Mother connection, because I also have a deep connection with the Divine Mother. And for me, she's given me a lot of transmission herself. That I've worked in a lot of shamanic circles, totally unexpectedly. One time working in a shamanic circle, I felt this presence in the room, and I asked it who it is, and the presence responded back that it's Kali. And that started a whole long dialogue, and a dialogue with me and her, where I'm like, well, you could be a figment of my imagination, you could just be, you know, a byproduct of my brain. And she lovingly and playfully has taught me that that's not the case, that she's much more than our brain or my imagination, and she has a lot to teach us, and really to teach humanity, is what she shared with me, that we're in a sort of transitional time, a pretty dark phase, where humans think they're just this material body, and that when you die, the body dies, the consciousness ends. In a lot of ways, she's told me that that's very temporary and quite a delusion that's creating a lot of havoc and negativity in the world, and that actually our birthright are these divine souls, these divine beings, and that she wants humanity to remember that that's who we are, and that the more that they can resonate within that sort of field, that she can actually access them more, and she can provide her transmission more, so that humanity is more receptive to it. So I think that's central too, that I feel like her transmission is sort of embedded within my soul in a way, given how formative my interactions have been with her really over the past 10 or so years. I've had this ongoing relationship with her, and my soul nature is very much linked up with a lot of like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, in different sort of states of consciousness, I feel these connections with these subtle level beings. And what's interesting is that these subtle level beings also have transmissions, and they're here to help and teach. A friend of mine, he works in with some shamanic traditions in Peru, and he talked about like literally encountering these subtle level beings that provide him with these energetic transmissions, that they would actually implant it into his heart, and he would almost feel like electrocuted. And with some of these ceremonies, you know, he's pretty oriented in the kind of Western scientific worldview, but he's had a lot of experience in these. So he was curious, like he saw these sort of indigenous looking people in the environment during the ceremony, and he was so entranced, and like he wanted to see, is this just happening in my imagination, or is this like really out there? So he asked another person in the ceremony, what do you see there? And what he saw was like an indigenous looking man smoking a cigarette. And he said to another participant in the ceremony, what do you see there? And the person went like, oh, an indigenous looking man smoking a cigarette? So it's almost like we're kind of, right now, I think we're in this transition point when we're starting to open up to a lot of dimensions and realms that are way beyond, much more vast than some of these materialistic views out there. So I think as we all evolve together, I think we're going to realize there's a lot of different forms of transmission happening, and that the more we can open to that, even those domains can help in our own evolution and our own development. That's about it for me.
Wow, that was wonderful. You know, I'm struck listening to you, Kelly, and, you know, listening to the other two, to Sugandhi and Van as well, you know, about the word transmission. It's so evocative because we're talking so much about resonance. And I'm thinking of, you know, Amma uses the metaphor that it's like you're just tuning the dial on the radio, and then you pick up the wavelength. So that the more we open ourselves to transmission, the more we're open to everything that's transmitting in the world. And we're tapping into that all the different levels and layers and Davies. And I know I went to Peru, Sugandhi and I went to Peru, and we went to the place in Bolivia. I think it's I can't think of the name of it all of a sudden, but it's the wall through which they believed that the Inca came, the gods came. And so you stand and you put your head in this little indentation. And I had a particular experience. And then a couple of years later, I read a book about a man who was claiming his shamanic heritage, who was born in Bolivia. And he described to a T the exact experience that I had in that place, in that time. So, you know, transmission is so big, and it's so important not to get too bogged down into the materialization of, can we quantify it? And yet there we see it's been quantified in this, you know, the Maharishi effect that you mentioned as well. So it's quite magical. And it's, you know, it says in the orientation course, it's the X factor in our teaching. And I think that's really true. You know, we're helping students to, and each other, to continue to refine our ability to perceive fully in the whole field of consciousness.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up this conversation? Van and Sugandhi, anything you want to chime in? Please feel free.
Yes, I'm inspired. I'm very excited. I think, well, one thing, it's like there's, besides the discriminative sage in me, there's a devotional mystic in me, and it's wonderful and magical, and by funny coincidence how this panel got put together. And we're all Divine Mother people, and so to hear Sugandhi, how she does her sessions, I was going, oh, that's so beautiful. Love and you know, I pray to the mother too, and I've kind of had to keep this quieter. And so it's wonderful to be able to, come forward more.
Yes.
So it's very beautiful. And so, I see let's say this, what I might call the Supreme Divine Mother as the womb of existence, like the heart womb of existence, and not just as a big deity. And there's what I call paradoxical prayer, where I pray to the Divine Mother and I am her. We all am her. The other thing I wanted to say, that let's say the love and bliss and living divine Shakti current, that in the past has been called distractions from consciousness, from the transcendental awareness. It actually aids the embodiment process. It aids being down, because it makes bodily human existence more pleasurable. So I mentioned the neurotic issues I deal with. Well, I still, with this bliss and love, bliss intoxication, it made being alive worthwhile, happy, like you're in love. And then you can bear the difficult challenges more easily, and then also have a sense of our inherent divinity and sacredness, and being held in the arms of the love of the mother. The universe is a friendly place, and as a traumatized little kid, it's like, it's a scary place, feeling like a trapped little animal going, ah. And so this is part of healing that is deeper beyond just psychology and therapy, which I found very helpful and essential. And if people have deep wounding, I do recommend therapy, finding a good therapist that you resonate with. And it's wonderful that Kelly's in the psychology field and teaching, and has that background and skill. Then final thing, I want to give a little technique to help with gazing, either in your own meditation or when you're gazing. This is a little like trainer wheels. It can be helpful as a start. You may not need this, but just a very summary version. I call it dual simultaneous feeling. So just in summary, I would relax the body mind, just let myself be grounded in and as the body mind. And more likely might be doing this with my eyes closed. And then this is all going to become part of gazing and meditation, if you can incorporate it there. And then open feeling. So an important component of communion, the awakening process, as well as just enjoyment in awakened life, is opening and feeling, like unrestricted, unconditional feeling. You could even say it's love, just absolute embrace, unconditional feeling, moment to moment. You're letting the body mind be as it is, second to second, letting the feeling be open. And then from that relaxation and open feeling, just allowing everything to be as it is, arising in the moment, then I feel the divine unified field in which the body mind is arising, that it's held in. And I feel that, open and feeling to that. It's a form of communion. And then I let myself feel both at the same time, the body mind and the unified field, dual simultaneous feeling. And you could do that for a while. And then you could relax the tension off the body mind. So I'm abiding in that and relaxing attention on the body mind. Let the body mind just temporarily melt and dissolve into the unified field. So it just becomes one totality, one supreme field, this primordial oneness, and just temporarily let this body mind be immersed in that and just dissolve. And so there's only the supreme unified field of divine being of the mother. And then have that enjoyment. And you can do that for a while, and then you just bring yourself back into the room, into the body. So that's a little trick of feeling the paradox. With the paradox, you abide in it, in this unified field, then you abide as it. We all am that. And so that's one of the little tricks. You're, in a way, feeling two things at the same time: our infinite nature, our finite nature, the body, unified field. And then they're both, together, simultaneous paradox. So that's a little technique for that you could use with oneself in individual meditation or in gazing with another. So I just wanted to offer that. And this thank you, Subhaga, for putting this together and organizing this. It's just a magical happening. And you could see the beauty of the diversity of the teachers. I mean, I'm inspired to hear how you work with students, Sugandhi, and then the perspectives that you bring, Kelly. And I'm sure so many of the other teachers could, have this be similarly rich. And that, again, to put in the other commercial, that's the great diversity, the spiritual diversity of Trillium Awakening. And there's this huge umbrella so that we can, this whole, all these flavors and qualities of realizers of whole being realization can be teaching and sharing this with others with love.
One spirit, many unique voices.
Yeah.
And really the cool thing is you don't really even have to choose. You just have to kind of look and feel with your body and think, oh, maybe that one. And it will be perhaps that one. Might take a couple of tries, but there's a way in which, like, look at us, like you say, we're all connected to the Divine Mother, and here we are randomly in this panel together. Yeah. I'm just saying that because, I used to get really nervous, thinking, well, how can I get the right one? How can I find the right one, the right teacher for me? But really, that's going to come to you. That will come to you. Just open yourself up by looking at the pictures and reading the bios or whatever, just see and listen to yourself, and just go where you moved. It will be at least correct for the moment. Yeah.
You can have one main teacher and have other adjunct teachers, in Trillium, so you can work with more than one teacher in Trillium if you want to also. Some people.
Yeah, or move from, so I know some people move from teacher to teacher to teacher. They have one teacher for a while and then they move to somebody else because somebody else is drawing them. Their particular way of manifesting the awakening process or whatever suddenly becomes intriguing. They run across them and they'll move over there for a while, go back. It's all good. It's all good. Everybody has their own process and their own way of getting there. There's so much more to say too. Thank you for sort of pressing me to be here, and yeah, I'm really struck by how much more there is that we could say and how much more there is that we're going to discover about transmission, about the field of transmission. I'm very intrigued by Kelly's sort of transpersonal awareness, some kind of communication with unseen beings is also present in my life. That's very mysterious, and I'd love to know. I think more about all of that is going to come to light in the future as things continue to change and open.
Yeah, thank you so much, Subhaga, too, for organizing this and putting in the energy to make it happen. think it's a real gift to the community and others.
Thank you, Kelly. I can just see a whole series of conversations. I really liked having us all in the same screen room this way in this last bit. It really feels good to feel the enhanced transmission field and to feel the flavor of each of your individual unique beings showing up. Has not been easy to make this happen, this particular panel, so thanks for your patience. And thanks to all of you who are watching this at whatever time that may be. We hope that it's useful for you. And remember to visit the Trillium Awakening website and see what's happening there. Find your teacher, find your people. Thank you very much.